Hey there, drowsy historian here. Tonight we're not drifting off to battles or plagues or kings with too many wives. We're walking a quieter, harder road across the plains of 19th century America, alongside those who were never meant to survive it. This is the story of what it meant to be native in a century that took more than it gave. A story of vanished buffalo, broken treaties, and children returned from boarding schools with names they barely recognised. It isn't loud history. It's the kind written in hunger, silence, and the slow erasure of a people who kept breathing anyway. Before the stories are confiscated and the ceremonies driven underground, before your world is redrawn in someone else's handwriting, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if this kind of quiet truth helps you fall asleep. Feel free to drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. It's always powerful to see who's sharing the silence. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to walk through a history that was never supposed to reach the present, but somehow did. You're born into a world already losing its shape. The elders say it used to be wider. The rivers used to run freer. The forests thicker. The herds endless. But by the time you arrive, those are stories, not memories. Your mother sings you to sleep with a voice that carries grief you don't yet understand. Wrapped in the language your government has quietly labelled a problem. You are loved deeply by people who already know. You will have less than they did, and they didn't have much left to begin with. Your village isn't where it used to be. It was moved, then moved again. The ground beneath your feet has stopped being home and started becoming temporary, a place borrowed until the next white surveyor decides to call it something else. Maybe it becomes farmland. Maybe it gets handed out like a gift to a stranger from Ohio who doesn't know a sweat lodge from a pigsty. Either way, you learn early that land isn't something you can count on, not even the land your ancestors are buried in. Sometimes your parents argue about what's coming next. They're not loud about it, just tired. Maybe it's the army this time, or some missionary, or a new Indian agent who promises things with a pen and takes them with a ledger. You're too young to know the details, but you understand enough to sense the danger in every knock at the door, every figure on horseback who doesn't speak your language. You notice how the adults fall silent when the flag appears on the horizon. The adults call them treaties. You hear that word a lot, but never in a happy sentence. It always comes with another one. Broken. The paper was signed, sometimes under threat, sometimes after a bottle of cheap whiskey, sometimes because it was that or get shot, but it doesn't matter. The ink dries, the promises fade, and the land disappears anyway. You don't understand how words on a paper can take a whole forest away, but they do, and they keep doing it. Your people try to adapt. They always have. They move, they bend, they make space where there isn't any. But adapting isn't the same as thriving, and you can feel that too. Your clothes are a mix of old and new, deerskin patched with feed sackcloth. Your food comes partly from memory, partly from government rations that taste like boredom. You're taught the old songs, but only in whispers now. You repeat them with your cousins, but not too loud. Not when someone might be listening. At night, the elders tell stories around the fire, but the fire is smaller than it used to be, and the stories have begun to sound like eulogies. They speak of long journeys and sacred lands, of rivers that healed and mountains that watched over them. You close your eyes and try to picture it all, but it feels like someone else's dream. You're growing up in the echo, not the chorus. There's beauty still, in the sky, in your grandmother's smile, in the way your uncle paints symbols on the inside of his coat. But it's a beauty under siege. When you're old enough to walk, you notice the roads. Not the ones your people made. Those are quiet, subtle paths through brush and memory. No, these roads are wide, arrogant things that cut straight through the world. Like they own it. The wagons on them don't stop for you. The men driving them don't look at you. The soldiers stationed near your village don't speak unless they're giving orders, and those orders never lead to anything good. You don't need to be taught that these men are dangerous. You feel it in your bones. You were born into a broken promise, one you didn't agree to and can't escape. You are not defeated, but you are surrounded. You learn to walk carefully, speak cautiously, and carry the weight of 1,000 decisions made without you. The world is changing fast and not for your sake. You're not a pioneer or a patriot or a character in a history book. You're a child with a shrinking map, watching the borders of your life close in before you've even learnt how to read. You don't remember a time when your family wasn't moving, not in the adventurous, trailblazing kind of way the history books will later romanticize, but in the tired, trudging kind of way that happens when your home stops being yours and starts being available. Available for farming, available for railroads, available for anyone who looks at a map made back east and decides that your homeland is just another blank square waiting for improvement. And so you move, not because you want to, but because staying means starving, fighting, or disappearing. You don't have a home anymore. You have stopping points, places where the grass hasn't been claimed yet, where the rivers still run clear, and where soldiers don't patrol, at least not this week. The adults talk about settlers with the same tone they use for floods or storms. They're not angry, not exactly, just resigned, like people who've spent too long watching the horizon for things that come to take, not give. The settlers always arrive smiling. Sometimes they offer trade, sometimes they offer stories about God or schools or statehood. But sooner or later, they offer nothing, just fences. You hear the word progress sometimes, especially when the missionaries come through. They mean trains and towns and newspapers in languages you don't speak. They mean sawmills and churches and names you're expected to answer to, even if they're not yours. You're told that progress is good, that it will lift your people up, as if your people were sleeping under a spell that only bricks and ploughs could break. But all you see is the world closing in. Trees fall, hills get flattened, paths disappear under iron rails, and none of it is for you. The buffalo start to vanish, and you don't need anyone to explain what that means. Your people have followed them for generations. Their movement was your calendar, your compass, your lifeline. But now, the herds are thinning. Sometimes you find entire carcasses left to rot, skinned for hides and abandoned by men who don't need the meat. Sometimes, you just don't find any at all. Your uncles hunt farther each month. They come back with less. One day, they come back empty-handed. They don't speak about it, but you see it in their eyes, the certainty that something sacred has been broken. With the buffalo go the old rhythms. Ceremonies feel thinner now, like they're missing pieces. Songs get shorter. Meals do too. People leave to find other bands or better land or something, anything, that might feel stable. But there is no stable. The borders keep shifting. What's safe one season is fenced off the next. You start to hear more stories about skirmishes, burned camps, and entire bands marched away under threat of rifles. Some come back, most don't. You ask once why the soldiers are always here, why they build forts and outposts and roads right through the middle of your trails. An elder tells you flatly, because they can. No mystery, no deeper meaning, just power exercised. That's how it works now. The soldiers bring wagons full of things your people never asked for. Flour, axes, blankets, paper, and then act like you owe them for it. If you say no, they take anyway. If you say yes, they take more. You learn that silence is safer than protest, and obedience is safer than pride. Sometimes the soldiers come not just with guns, but with surveyors, men with clipboards and measuring ropes and maps rolled under their arms. They don't look at you. They don't ask questions. They just walk around your home like they already own it. You hear them use words like potential, unclaimed and underutilized. You want to shout, to explain what this place means to your people. But you've seen what happens to those who speak too loudly. so you stay quiet. You watch them draw lines that make no sense, slicing through rivers and hills as if geography were just a suggestion. You notice the missionaries more now. They always bring gifts, books, food, medicine, but they ask for things in return. Your attention, your language, your soul. They smile when they tell you that Jesus loves you, but they never ask what your own gods think. You're young, so you smile back. You sit through the sermons. You try to read the books, even though the letters all blur together. You nod when they call your language devil speech, even though it's the only tongue that knows how to say your grandmother's name. The settlers begin to build towns near the edges of your camp. At first, it's just a trading post or a blacksmith's hut, but it spreads like mould. Before long, there's a saloon, a jail, a school. None of them are for you. You're welcome to walk through town, as long as you don't speak too loudly, don't linger, and don't forget your place. Your parents warn you not to look anyone in the eye for too long. Your cousin gets arrested once for loitering, even though he was just sitting by the road. He doesn't talk much after that. As you grow older, you start to feel the borders not just around you, but inside you. You begin to dream in two languages, one yours, one not. You start to measure your words, weighing them for safety before you speak. You start to wonder what your life would look like if you had been born elsewhere, or else when. But there's no time for wondering. The world is still shrinking, and you're too busy keeping up to think much about the horizon. That's where the soldiers come from. That's where the railroad goes. That's where the next opportunity is for someone else. You hear adults talk about relocation again, a new treaty, a new place, somewhere permanent. You've heard that word before, and it never means what it's supposed to. You don't even ask where it is this time. You just start packing, not because you're ready, but because you know what happens if you're not. You wrap up what little your family still has, a few tools, a few keepsakes, a few bitter memories, and you prepare to lose the rest. The world keeps shrinking, not all at once, but a little, every day. A river dammed, a hunting ground fenced, a song forgotten, a child renamed. The people who do this to you will later write about your culture as if it's extinct, as if it vanished naturally, like a species unable to adapt. But you know the truth. You watched it vanish with every mile you were forced to walk. You lived it with every word you were told to forget. You survived it somehow, though you're not sure that's the right word for it, because survival isn't freedom. Survival is just waking up in a world smaller than the one you went to sleep in. The school isn't really a school, not in the way you thought schools were supposed to be. You imagined books, maybe desks, maybe someone teaching things like how to read the stars or count buffalo. What you get instead is a building made of hard corners and louder doors, run by people who don't smile with their eyes. You're told it's a blessing to be here, a chance to become something better than what you were. You don't remember asking to be improved. The first thing they do is cut your hair, not trim it, cut it. The braids your mother tied with such care, the ones blessed by your grandmother's hands, are hacked off with rusted shears and dropped on the floor like trash. No ceremony, no explanation. Just one of the teachers saying something about cleanliness and obedience. You don't cry at first, you're too stunned. But when you reach up later and touch your bare neck, it hits you. Something sacred is gone, and no one seems to care but you. Then comes your name. You say it proudly, the way your family says it, wrapped in vowels shaped by generations. The teacher pauses, furrows her brow, and says it wrong, badly wrong, then declares that it's too difficult. You are given a new name, a Christian one, something short and sharp that fits easier in English mouths. It's stitched into your clothes and written on your school records. The old name? You're told to forget it, say it again, and there will be consequences. You learn the rules quickly. Don't speak your language, don't question the Bible, don't sing, don't dance, don't look anyone in authority in the eye for too long, or they'll accuse you of insolence. You're told your stories are myths, your gods are demons, your prayers are superstitions. Every part of you that doesn't fit their mould is marked for correction, and correction is not gentle. The school is full of strange smells, boiled laundry, chalk dust, cold porridge, and something sour that clings to the walls. The food is meagre and bland. The beds are stiff. The punishments are worse. You see classmates whipped for speaking out of turn. You see a girl's knuckles wrapped bloody for whispering in her native tongue. You learn to eat fast, walk straight, and keep your thoughts quiet. Some of the other kids stop talking altogether. They call it assimilation. You call it forgetting. You feel parts of yourself peeling away like bark from a dying tree. You try to hold on quietly. You mouth your real name before bed. You hum your grandmother's lullaby when no one's around. You trace patterns in the dust that once belonged to stories. But the school is relentless. Every day brings another demand to erase what little remains. You feel yourself folding in, becoming smaller to survive. You're taught to read, but only certain books. Mostly the Bible, sometimes a history text that tells you Columbus discovered a land where your people have lived forever. The map in the classroom doesn't show your tribe. It shows lines drawn by men who have never set foot on your sacred grounds. You ask once where your people are on the map, and the teacher says, "Those names don't matter anymore." You don't ask again. Religion is everywhere. Morning prayers, evening hymns, Sunday sermons. You're told that God loves all his children, but somehow you're always treated as the difficult one. You try to understand the stories, the floods, the plagues, the commandments, but they feel strange, like someone else's dreams. The priest says Jesus died for your sins, but you don't remember sinning before they took your name, your hair, your language, and called it salvation. The days blur together. You scrub floors, mend sheets, recite verses. You're always watched. Letters from home are censored or never arrive. Sometimes a child disappears, sent back home, they say, or sick, or needed elsewhere. No one explains, no one asks. You just keep moving through the schedule, pretending you're not afraid of what happens behind the closed doors of the headmaster's office. At night, you hear crying down the hall. Some kids cry for their parents, some cry without knowing why. You meet other children from different tribes, children who speak different tongues, carry different traditions, wear different beaded patterns. But here, you're all the same, flattened, unmade. You learn to share scraps of memory in secret, a phrase passed between classes, a forbidden story whispered through walls. It becomes a kind of quiet rebellion, a reminder that, beneath the uniforms and English names, you are not what they say you are. Sometimes you dream in your old language, and when you wake, the taste of it is bittersweet. It reminds you that the school hasn't taken everything. Not yet. You cling to that. You hold onto the sound of your mother's voice, even as it begins to fade. You try to remember what your name felt like in your mouth. You try to remember what freedom sounded like when the wind moved through your village and not through barred windows. The teachers tell you that once you graduate, you'll be ready for the world. You'll have opportunities, you'll be civilized, but the world they mean isn't your world, it's theirs. And it doesn't want you, not really. It just wants you quiet. It wants you grateful. It wants you to smile and nod and never bring up where you came from. It wants you to blend in without ever truly belonging. And when you fail to do that, when your accent slips or your skin reminds someone of a history they'd rather forget, they'll blame you for not trying hard enough. Eventually, you're allowed to return home, but nothing feels right. Your village is smaller, your family older, your tongue clumsy with words you haven't spoken in years. You feel like a stranger, wearing familiar skin. The elders welcome you back, but you see the sadness in their eyes. They see what's been taken. They hear the stiffness in your voice, the absence of stories you should have known. You are alive, yes, but you're changed, and the change wasn't your choice. You carry the school with you, in your silence, in the way you flinch when someone raises their voice, in the way you hesitated before speaking your own language, as if the punishment might still come. You survived it, which is more than some can say. But survival doesn't mean you're whole. It just means they didn't finish the job. You remember the sound before anything else, the rumble under your feet, like thunder caught in the bones of the earth. The air would change, charged with motion and dust, and the horizon would ripple as the herds came. Buffalo, endless and alive, moving with a kind of sacred rhythm your people had known forever. They were more than animals. They were timekeepers, providers, stories wrapped in flesh, and for a little while, they were still part of your world. Then the shots started, not the kind fired in hunts, not with care, not with gratitude. These were volleys, wild and loud and senseless. You watched white men climb off trains and shoot from the safety of platforms, laughing as the animals dropped by the dozens. Not for meat, not for ceremony, just for hides, just for sport, just because they could. The bodies were left to rot, stripped of usefulness, bloated under the sun, feeding no one. The elders said it wouldn't last, that the herds would return, like they always had. They said the buffalo were strong, stubborn, tied to the land in ways no man could undo. But they didn't know about organised extermination, about policies written in distant rooms that made the animals a target, not just of rifles, but of bureaucracy. The army called it a tactic. Starve the people, break their will. No buffalo, no food, no food, no resistance, no problem. You watch the numbers shrink like water in the heat. One year, you counted hundreds. The next, dozens. Then a single one, limping across a plain that used to tremble with life. Your uncle tried to follow its trail, but came back empty-handed. Gone, he said, though he didn't say it like a word. He said it like a wound. You didn't ask again. Without the herds, everything changes. The ceremonies lose their anchor. The tools made from hide and bone are patched with metal and cloth. The meat that once sustained your entire camp becomes a memory, then a craving, then a joke whispered around a fire built with scrub wood and desperation. You chew leather when there's nothing else, old scraps boiled until they soften enough to swallow. It doesn't help. The hunger stays. The government offers rations, sacks of flour, sugar and salt pork. None of it sits right in your stomach. It's heavy in the wrong ways. It makes the old people sick. It makes the young ones weak. You eat because it's that or nothing. You eat and wonder what's worse, starving or surviving on food that tastes like surrender. The flour clumps in the cold. The pork smells like iron. The sugar disappears fast, traded or hoarded like treasure. You've heard the word progress a lot by now. You're told that trains and towns and policies are part of a better world, a modern world. But to you, progress means tracks that split the plains in half and carry more men with more guns. Progress means treaties signed under duress and rations that poison your gut. Progress means your world dying in slow daily increments while someone else builds a new one on top of it. The soldiers don't talk about the buffalo. They don't have to. Their orders speak for them. They guard the railways and the supply depots. They clear land for settlers. They shoot first and rarely ask questions. You once saw a soldier pick off a deer from a cliffside and leave it where it fell. He smiled when he did it. You wondered if he even knew what that deer meant to you, or if it mattered. Children grow up without ever seeing a herd. They hear the stories, the ones with dust and thunder, and thousands of animals moving like one great living shadow, but they don't believe it. They think it's a fable like dragons or giants. You try to describe it once, but the words feel brittle. You realise you're already starting to forget the sound, the deep, living heartbeat of the land. That might be the worst part. When someone does bring down a buffalo, a stray survivor, a miracle on 4 legs, the whole camp gathers. The animal is honoured, not just killed. Every part is used. There is weeping. Not because of grief, but because of gratitude. because it feels like a ghost walked into your camp and offered itself up. The children stare with wide eyes. They touch the hide like it's a sacred relic. It is. Some tribes are forced to become farmers. The government thinks this is a kindness, a way to civilize, to stabilize. They give out tools, seeds, bad advice. The soil isn't right. The seasons are cruel. Your people weren't made to scratch the ground for food with iron ploughs and borrowed land. You try and fail and try again. You watch the crops die and the blame shift onto your shoulders. They say you're lazy, ungrateful, resistant to change. They don't say they gave you dead land and no choice. You look out over the plains sometimes and try to imagine what it must have been like before the fences, before the trains, before the soldiers and the barbed wire and the paper maps. You try to hear the thunder again. You close your eyes and listen to the wind, hoping it carries some echo of the herds your people once followed, like a living compass. But there's only silence now, wide and hollow. The buffalo were more than food. They were your history, your economy, your heartbeat. Without them, everything frays. Your people grow thinner, quieter, more cautious. Some begin to forget the old ways, not because they want to, but because there's no space left to practice them. The ceremonies feel emptier, without the animal at their centre. The stories start to fade. And in the quiet, you hear a new sound rising. Not the thunder of hooves, but the ticking of someone else's clock, counting down the moments until everything you knew is gone. You are still here. Hungry, yes. Angry, always. But breathing. You gather what little meat you can find, what little memory you can carry, and you hold on to it like flint. The buffalo may be ghosts now, but you are not. Not yet. You still remember. And sometimes remembering is the only weapon left. You don't remember the moment your homeland stopped being yours. It didn't happen with a single battle or a single signature. It happened like erosion, slow, relentless, and disguised as something reasonable. There was always some new reason. A discovery of gold, a new treaty, a railroad deal, a change in the political winds. One day, your village was part of a map. The next, it was in the way of progress. The men in uniforms said there was a place for you, just not here. So you moved, not because you wanted to, not because you understood, but because the choice wasn't really a choice. Stay and risk bullets or go and risk starvation. It's the kind of logic that sounds like generosity when printed in newspapers. Relocation, they call it. Resettlement. But you know what it is? Forced migration, dressed up in official language. An evacuation carried out at gunpoint. You pack what little you can carry. Food, blankets, the stories your grandmother still remembers, and begin walking. The trail is longer than they said it would be. It always is. You pass other families, other tribes, all marching in the same direction. Some have wagons, most don't. The wheels break anyway. The roads are rough, barely more than carved out animal trails in places. Mud clings to your ankles like punishment. Dust chokes your throat. The weather doesn't care that you're suffering. It's either too hot or too cold, never kind. You learn to keep walking, even when your legs feel like splinters. Children fall first. They tire quickly. Some collapse in the dirt and simply don't get up. Mothers weep without sound. Fathers carry small bodies wrapped in blankets, and you try not to look. If you look, you might stop too. Elders don't fare much better. They try to keep up, but time has already taken from them what this journey demands. They lag behind, then vanish, buried beneath unmarked stones along a trail that was never meant to be holy, but it becomes a kind of graveyard anyway. There is no dignity in this journey. There is only distance and exhaustion. The soldiers assigned to your escort barely speak to you unless it's to bark an order. They eat better than you do. They ride while you walk. Some of them look bored, some look angry, none look sorry. At night, you're given limited rations, cold beans, maybe a crust of bread, and expected to sleep under the open sky, wrapped in the cold. You hear coughing around you, wet and deep. You hear prayers too, though they grow quieter each day. Eventually, you arrive, or what they call arriving, a scrap of land, unfamiliar and underwhelming. Permanent Indian territory, they announce, as if the word permanent hasn't already become a joke. The ground is hard and dry, the trees are wrong, the rivers don't flow the way you know them. Everything feels tilted, like you've stepped sideways into a world that looks almost like home, but smells like morning. You're handed tools, rusted, cracked, someone else's cast-offs, and told to build your new life. You try. You all do. You dig wells, plant corn, set up tents, then cabins. You hunt what little game there is. You try to find rhythm in a place that doesn't have your songs in its soil, but the ground doesn't listen. It's stubborn and stingy. The crops fail. The water tastes like metal. The winters are cruel. You grow thinner, quieter. Some leave, some vanish. The reservation isn't fenced, not at first, but you stay put anyway. Not because you believe in its safety, but because there's nowhere else to go. And then the fences come. Barbed wire, patrol routes, paperwork. Everything measured, everything counted. You have to ask permission to leave, even to visit a neighbouring village. The government says it's for your protection. But protection feels a lot like a cage when it comes with surveillance. You get used to being watched. Not like a person, but like a threat that hasn't earned the benefit of the doubt. They count your livestock, your tools, even your firewood. You're not trusted to manage your own survival. The reservation agents are mostly white men who think they know what's best for you. They hand out rations based on loyalty. They punish those who speak out. They write long reports full of phrases like compliance and assimilation. If you protest, they call you hostile. If you refuse to farm in straight rows, they say you're uncivilized. If you ask for medicine, they hand you a Bible. You learn that being invisible is safer than being noticed. Even ceremonies have to go underground. The dances, the songs, the rituals, they're all forbidden now. You practice them in secret, when the moon is high and the soldiers are looking elsewhere. You teach your children to whisper the words instead of singing them. You bury your sacred items in the earth. Your gods are not welcome here, but they come anyway, in dreams, in firelight, in the spaces between surveillance. The land doesn't kill you outright. That would be too merciful. Instead, it erodes you, slowly, quietly. 1,000 paper cuts instead of a single wound. You get sick from the water. You break bones using broken tools. You watch your loved ones waste away from malnutrition, from infection, from despair. When the missionaries arrive, they tell you to be grateful. They say suffering brings you closer to salvation. You try not to laugh or scream. You thought the walk was the worst of it. But this is the long death, the one they don't write songs about, the one that happens slowly enough to look like peace if you're not paying attention. The reservation is supposed to be a home, but it's a holding cell, a place where your culture is expected to wither in polite silence, a museum exhibit waiting to be declared extinct. Still, you hold on. You gather what's left. You pass stories like smuggled goods. You raise your children to remember, even if remembering hurts. You refuse to disappear, even when everything around you is designed to make you vanish. You survive, again. Because moving didn't kill you, not yet, but staying still might. You wake each day to the sound of nothing. No herds, no drums, no freedom of movement, just the rustle of dry wind over dead grass and the occasional creak of a government-issued door. Life on the reservation isn't dramatic, and that's part of the cruelty. It doesn't strike you down all at once. It seeps in, quiet and constant. You are alive technically, but only because the system keeps you hovering just above the threshold of collapse. They've mastered the art of slow erasure, and you're what remains in the margins. Everything here is accounted for. Your food, your tools, your firewood, your movement, your religion, your worth. There's paperwork for all of it. The Indian agent has a desk full of forms, each one a little gate you need to pass through just to do something basic. Leave the boundaries, marry someone, chop down a tree. You've never seen so many ways to say no in such official language. Every decision must be approved by a man who doesn't speak your language and doesn't care to. Rations arrive on a schedule, but the schedule is more of a suggestion. You get what's left after someone else takes the first cut, usually the agent, sometimes the soldiers, often both. Flour with weevils, salt pork with a skin like boot leather, canned food labelled in English with ingredients you can't pronounce. It keeps you from starving most of the time, but it doesn't make you healthy. Your belly stays full of air more than food, your bones ache, your children's hair thins. Hunger becomes a kind of background noise. You can't hunt anymore, not legally, not without a permit, and the herds you once followed are gone anyway. You're told to farm, but the soil is poor, and the tools are worse. They gave you a plough held together with wire and a mule that limps. The corn grows like it's trying to die. Every harvest is smaller than the last, and when you ask for help, the agent tells you to pray harder and use the Christian work ethic. You wonder if the Christian work ethic involves stealing someone's land and then insulting their corn. The missionaries are everywhere. They wear white collars and soft shoes and expressions of eternal pity. They offer you salvation, but it always comes with conditions, mostly involving your culture. They hold church services in what used to be your meeting house. They call your gods false and your stories dangerous. You are told your ancestors were ignorant, your ceremonies demonic, your songs offensive. You're encouraged to confess sins that don't feel like sins, like speaking your own language or remembering what your people were before they were labelled a problem. Hymns echo across the reservation like smoke from a slow fire. You hear them morning and night. You don't hate the music exactly. Some of it is even beautiful in a distant sort of way. But you hate the way it replaces your own songs. You hate the way it fills the silence that used to belong to drums. You hate the way the missionaries look so pleased with themselves when you sing along, like they've won something, like they've saved you from yourself. Ceremonies are outlawed now, officially. You can't dance, you can't fast, you can't hold gatherings that don't involve church pews and approved Bibles. So you do it anyway, quietly at night, in back rooms and forgotten clearings. The risk is real. You've seen men arrested for burning sage. You've seen a woman beaten for wearing ceremonial jewellery during a government inspection. But you continue, because some things matter more than safety. Because culture, once buried, doesn't always come back. The reservation agent walks through your village like a mayor, except no one voted for him, and everyone hates him. He refers to you as wards of the state, a phrase that sounds like charity, but feels like a cage. He decides who gets extra rations, who gets medical supplies, who gets punished. His bookkeeping is meticulous. His empathy is non-existent. He keeps census records with pride, as if counting the number of people left to suffer is some kind of achievement. Your grandparents grow quiet. They used to be the centre of everything. The wisdom, the stories, the connection to the before times. But they're tired now. Not just old, but worn thin. Their words are heavier, slower. You see them staring into the fire longer, as if looking for something lost in the smoke. When they speak, it's often to remind you of a name, a song, a plant, something important that might otherwise vanish. You listen carefully. You have to, because they're the last ones who still remember what the world looked like before the fences. School continues, if you can call it that. Your children are taught to read and write in English, but not in their own tongue. They recite the names of presidents they'll never meet and memorise the geography of states that took their land. They're told to be grateful for this education. You're told it's a gift, but you watch the way your child's accent dulls. You notice how their posture changes when a missionary enters the room. You hear them stammer when trying to remember the word. For eagle, in your language, you do not feel grateful. Sometimes an inspector comes from Washington or St. Louis or some other place that doesn't matter. They arrive with pens and wide eyes, looking around as if they've stumbled upon something fascinating instead of something broken. They take notes, they ask questions, they nod politely when you speak. Then they leave and nothing changes. Their reports go into a filing cabinet somewhere and gather dust beside other reports just like them, records of suffering that serve no purpose beyond reminding people that someone noticed. What does change is you. Slowly but deeply. You start to measure time by losses. The last time you ate real game. The last time you saw a full ceremonial gathering. The last elder who died without passing down their stories. You walk with caution. You speak with hesitation. You carry your culture like contraband, hiding it where the agent won't find it. You are not broken, but you are bent. And bending becomes a way of life. But even in this place, with its fences, its agents, its hunger, and its hymns, you find cracks where light slips through. A story shared in secret. A child who still hums a forbidden melody. An elder who teaches a single word to a new tongue. These are not victories, not really, but they are something. And on the reservation, something is everything. It starts with another promise. Wrapped in good intentions, dressed in patriotic language, and delivered with just enough paperwork to make it feel official. This one comes with a name, the Dawes Act. You don't know who Dawes is. You assume he's important, or at least confident, because only a man who has never lived on a reservation could think that carving tribal lands into little squares would be a good idea. They say it's progress. They say it's the future. They say it's for your own good. The government decides to turn your land into property. That's the first insult. Land, to your people, has never been a thing you can own. It's not something you fence or measure or list in a ledger. It's alive, it's shared, it's sacred. But the men behind desks in Washington disagree. They take maps and rulers and start slicing up your homeland like a pie at a party you weren't invited to. Each tribal member is given a parcel, a fixed number of acres supposedly chosen with fairness, though the soil quality always seems to lean in someone else's favour. They call it allotment. You call it theft, quiet legal theft. On paper, you're a landowner now. That's supposed to be a good thing, but the plot you're given is unfamiliar, isolated, and nowhere near the ceremonial grounds your family once used. The government says this land is yours, individually, not tribally. That word matters. It means you're no longer part of a shared inheritance. You're just a name on a deed, a name that can be bought, borrowed against, or easily defrauded. At first, you don't understand why they're doing this. Then you see the phrase, surplus land. It's the land that's left after every tribal member has been given their little piece. All the hills, rivers, hunting trails, and forests that didn't make it into someone's individual allotment. That land? It's now available for sale to railroads, to speculators, to settlers with wagons full of furniture and entitlement. The land that was once yours collectively is now theirs legally. You blink, and half your reservation is gone. They tell you it's about assimilation, teaching you to live like a white man. But what it really teaches you is how quickly generosity turns into exploitation. You're expected to farm your new land, but no one tells you how to handle taxes, or titles, or the mortgage scams waiting just around the corner. Suddenly, men with briefcases show up, offering loans you don't need, terms you don't understand, and contracts written in legal riddles. Miss a payment, and your land is gone. Sell it to feed your family for one winter, and it's gone for good. The agent encourages you to sell. It's just a little piece, he says. You still have the rest. But so does everyone else. Piece by piece, your community fractures. Some people lose their land to debt. Others are manipulated or coerced. A few just give up, tired of pretending to own something that never felt like theirs. The tribe, as a collective entity, fades from the map. On paper, you're progressing. In reality, you're disappearing. You try to resist. Some tribal councils push back. Some elders warn the young not to sign anything without understanding it. Some people simply refuse to move onto their allotments, hoping to hold on to something larger than a numbered tract. But the system doesn't care about resistance. It has already moved on. New settlers build fences on your hunting trails. The railroad cuts through what used to be your gathering ground. A church is built on top of an old burial site. You complain, and the agent smiles like he's done you a favour. The new neighbours don't see you, or if they do, they see inconvenience. You're in the way of a better future, one they've been promised in glossy pamphlets and speeches about manifest destiny. They don't know what you lost and they don't ask. They post signs warning you to stay off their land. They file complaints if you fish in a stream your people have used for centuries. They treat you like a guest overstaying your welcome, on the land that used to be your birthright. And through all of it, the paperwork keeps growing. The allotment process produces a flood of maps, deeds, contracts, surveys, and records. A whole bureaucracy blooms around your dispossession, thriving like weeds on a battlefield. Every acre lost is catalogued with precision. Every transfer of land is notarized. Your grief is buried under signatures and seals. If pain could be measured in ink, the Dawes Act would be an ocean. 90 million acres. That's how much land native people lost under allotment. Not to war, not to fire, not even to disease, but to pens, to phrases like, for your benefit, and to promote civilization. You don't remember losing it all at once. No one does. It happened slowly, transaction by transaction, like erosion in a canyon, invisible until it's too deep to climb out of. What stings most is that you're told you should be grateful. You're a landowner now. You have a title. You've been given the tools to succeed, they say. But those tools came without instructions, and the price of the gift was everything you actually valued. You don't want to be a landowner. You want to be part of a people, a place, a culture that hasn't been carved into rectangles and sold off at auction. But that option isn't on the table. The reservation, once a bitter compromise, is now a ghost of itself. The community that once moved as one, that shared food, labour, grief, celebration, is scattered. You live on your plot. Your cousin lives on his. Your grandmother, who used to live at the centre of everything, now lives alone at the edge of someone else's pasture. You wave across fences. You meet less often. You speak less of the old ways. Not because you've forgotten, but because there's no shared space left to practice them. So you adapt again. You gather what you can. You build fences when you have to. You teach your children that this piece of land is still sacred, even if it came wrapped in betrayal. You remind them where the streams once flowed and which stones used to mark the edge of ceremonies. You tell them about a time before allotment, before paperwork, before theft disguised as generosity. Because if you don't, no one else will. You grew up on stories of resistance, not just the kind told around fires, but the ones whispered with tension, still clinging to the words. Stories of warriors who once rode out under moonlight, who painted their faces and fought for something bigger than themselves. You hear names passed between generations like Precious Stones, Crazy Horse, Geronimo, Sitting Bull. They sound like thunder trapped in human form. You cling to them, imagining what it would be like to stand tall against a storm, to fight, to win, to matter. But when your time comes, it's already too late. The guns are different now, louder, faster, endless. The cavalry rides with Gatling guns and supply trains. The forts have grown into towns. The trails your ancestors knew by heart are now crossed with barbed wire and train tracks. You don't ride out to war on horseback with painted shields. You hide in scrub brush, outgunned, outnumbered, outmaneuvered. You aren't a warrior anymore. You're a hostile element, a problem to be resolved. The army doesn't care about honour. It doesn't see your defiance as bravery. It sees it as inconvenience. They describe every act of resistance as savagery, every skirmish as a victory for civilization. It doesn't matter who struck first. It doesn't matter if your people were defending sacred land or children or memory itself. The official reports will call it an engagement. Casualties will be listed without names. Your dead will be buried far from home, or not at all. You hear of uprisings in other places. A band in Arizona refuses to leave their canyon. A leader in the Dakotas tries to unite the tribes again, but each time the story ends the same way. They are surrounded, they are betrayed, they are captured or killed or dragged before some judge in a courtroom that smells like dust and condescension. Their resistance is recorded in ledgers, not songs. Their names are turned into chapter headings in books written by the descendants of their enemies. By the time you're old enough to hold a weapon, most of the fighting is over. The wars are called finished, but that's only true on maps. On the ground, there's still tension, raids, skirmishes, sudden acts of violence that don't make the history books. You know better than to call it peace. Peace is supposed to feel like a relief. This feels like a warning. You learn to flinch at the sound of hooves. You keep your knife sharp, even when you're told it's unnecessary. The treaties you grew up hearing about, the ones your elders cited like scripture, mean nothing now. They were made to be broken, and they were. Sometimes within weeks, sometimes before the ink dried. You once asked an Indian agent why the government didn't honour them. He laughed and said, "That was a different administration." You still think about that laugh. How casual it was. How small. They told your people they could stay if they behaved. Then they moved you. They said you could live in peace if you signed. Then they sent soldiers. They promised food if you surrendered. Then gave you spoiled rations. Every treaty became a trap. Every signature a countdown to removal. And when your people stopped trusting paper, they called you unreasonable. Resistance becomes impossible in the ways it used to be. There's no room for organised revolt, no space for strategic retreat. Every movement is watched, every messenger followed, every camp infiltrated. You can't gather in large groups without being accused of plotting something. You can't ride too far without raising suspicion. You can't even pray in public without drawing attention. The enemy doesn't wear war paint. It wears badges and carries maps. When resistance happens, it's not like the stories. There's no rallying cry, no thundering charge. It's desperate, disorganised. Blood comes quick and meaningless. You hear of a young man who attacked a wagon train. His family had been starved out, his sister taken by soldiers. He's caught, tried and hanged within a week. His name doesn't travel far. His act isn't remembered as courage. The newspapers call him a madman, a savage. You call him familiar. And when your people do try to organise, to fight back in a way that feels righteous, the response is overwhelming. Not just soldiers, not just guns, but newspapers, speeches, policies. Suddenly you're not a community. You're a threat to national security, a blight, a nuisance. The generals call for reinforcements, the politicians call for removal, the settlers call for extermination. All for one village that dared to stand up and say, no. The aftermaths are always the same. Bodies, trials, mass graves, reassignments. Whole bands disappear. Some are marched off to distant territories. Some are split up and sent to boarding schools. Some are never heard from again. And the ones who remain are left to sweep the ashes and pretend like something wasn't just extinguished in front of them. The government calls it pacification. You call it what it is, annihilation, dressed in red tape. There are memorials eventually, plaques nailed into rocks by well-meaning historians, a battlefield preserved as a park, maybe even a reenactment with actors in buckskins pretending they understand the grief they're pantomiming. But there are no markers for the sorrow your people carry, no monuments to the silence that followed, no lines carved into granite that say, here is where the future was stolen. You think of the warriors you heard about as a child, the ones who rode free, who shouted into the wind, who fought for their people, even when defeat was certain. You wonder what they would think of you, quiet, landless, boxed in by laws and curfews. You wonder if they would see you as a survivor or a shadow. You wonder if survival is enough when there's so little left to live for. But you don't forget. That's the one act of defiance you still control. You remember the names they tried to erase, the battles they tried to downplay, the villages that once stood tall and proud before they were turned into footnotes. You tell your children not just the stories, but the truths beneath them, that resistance isn't always war paint and rifles. Sometimes it's breath. Sometimes it's memory. Sometimes it's simply continuing to exist in a world that tried so hard to erase you. They call it peace, you call it silence, but beneath that silence, something still burns. It begins as a whisper, not in the ears of the soldiers or the settlers, but in the hearts of your people. A vision spreads, passed from camp to camp like a sacred ember, a dream of return, of healing, of undoing the wounds that were never meant to heal. It's not about war, it's not about bloodshed, it's about hope. The buffalo will return, the earth will shake off the fences, the ancestors will rise, the white world will fall away like snow in spring. All you have to do is dance. The ghost dance is unlike anything you've known. It's not a rebellion, but it feels like one. It's a circle of feet and song and belief, a spinning prayer repeated with aching legs and desperate lungs. You don't wear feathers or carry weapons. You wear shirts blessed by prophets, believed to be strong enough to stop bullets. You fast, you chant, you cry, you dance until your muscles tremble and your vision blurs. But you don't stop. Because stopping means accepting the world as it is, and that's more unbearable than the pain in your knees. You aren't alone. The dance spreads across nations. Tribes separated by language, history, and geography find themselves drawn to the same fire. In every corner of the shrinking map, your people are dancing. Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Paiute. The dream passes between them like a long-forgotten song. You don't know how it started, not exactly. There was a man named Wovoka, a prophet from the West, who had a vision. During an eclipse, he said the earth would renew itself if you just danced hard enough, long enough, with faith. And so you do. But the soldiers don't see faith, they see uprising. The settlers don't hear prayer, they hear war drums. The same dance that brings your people hope brings terror to those who hold the power. They say it's a cult, they say it's a threat, they say it's the first sign of rebellion. No one asks what the songs mean. No one listens to the words. They just see brown bodies moving in rhythm and assume the rifle should come next. You keep dancing, even as scouts report increased army presence, even as the Indian agent grows nervous and starts writing letters filled with words like insurgency and containment, even as newspapers in faraway cities start printing panic, even as the government declares the movement illegal. You dance because it's the only thing you have left. It's not just religion, it's reclamation. It's the only way left to speak to your ancestors, to call them back into the circle. If they come, maybe the buffalo will too. Maybe the rivers will flow clean again. Maybe the land will remember you. But then comes Wounded Knee. You don't see it happen, not firsthand. But the story reaches you faster than any bullet ever could. A group of Lakota, led by Bigfoot, tried to reach safety. They were intercepted by the 7th Cavalry. The soldiers claimed they wanted peace. They asked for weapons. Tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. A single shot rang out. No one's sure who fired first. And then everything exploded. Women, children, elders, gunned down in the snow. More than 150 bodies left in the cold. Some say closer to 300. It's not a battle. It's a massacre. You hear the details in pieces. A baby found clutched in a dead mother's arms. An old man shot while crawling away. songs drowned in gunfire, a blizzard burying the bodies before they could be mourned. You try not to imagine it, but you do anyway. You picture the circle breaking, the prayers silenced mid-breath, the dance ending in blood and frozen earth. You wonder if the soldiers felt anything, if they thought they were winning, if they told themselves they were stopping a threat instead of murdering a miracle. The ghost dance doesn't end at Wounded Knee, not entirely, but something breaks, something essential. The dream doesn't feel as bright. The circle doesn't feel as safe. People still gather, still sing, still move, but with more caution, with more silence. You dance, but now you keep your eyes on the horizon. You pray, but you expect it to be interrupted. The faith is still there, but it flickers. You try to keep it lit. In the aftermath, the newspapers call it a necessary act. The politicians call it a sad misunderstanding. The generals call it a tactical resolution. No one calls it murder. The soldiers responsible are given medals. Not one is punished. Not one loses sleep, at least not in public. The nation nods and moves on. Another chapter closed, another problem solved. You don't get to move on. You bury your friends. You try to explain to your children why their cousins won't be coming back. You struggle to find the words for what it means when prayer is answered with bullets. You try to keep the songs alive, but every time you hear the wind rush through the trees, it sounds too much like gunfire. You start to dance again one night, and your body locks up, not from fear, from grief. Some people stop dancing altogether. Others keep going, even if only in secret. You understand both. The ghost dance was never just about belief. It was about resistance, a quiet, spiritual rebellion in a world that outlawed every other kind. And for a moment, it made you feel whole, like maybe everything wasn't lost, like maybe you could call something back from the edge. That feeling doesn't die easily. Wounded Knee becomes a scar across the soul of your people, not just because of what happened there, but because of what it represented, the end of a certain kind of hope. A final warning that even your prayers are considered weapons, that even your peace is seen as provocation, that in the eyes of the state, you're always dangerous, even when your hands are empty and your eyes are closed. But you keep the memory, you hold it close, you pass it down, you say the names, you honour the dead, you teach your children the songs, even if only in whispers. You tell them why you danced, why you bled, why you never stopped, even when it cost everything. Because the ghost dance wasn't a failure, it was a flame, and even if it burned low after Wounded Knee, it never went out. You are still here, and that too is a kind of prayer. The first time you see your culture in a museum, it doesn't feel like recognition. It feels like theft. There it is, the sacred pipe, a feathered headdress, a drum you could swear looks just like the one your uncle used to play. Each item sits beneath a glass case, labelled in careful handwriting and accompanied by a plaque that speaks in the past tense, used by Plains Indians in religious ceremonies, worn during traditional dances, associated with tribal myths. Everything about the display suggests you're no longer here. The tourists walk past without lowering their voices. They point at the regalia like it's a costume. They stand in front of beaded moccasins and speculate about how primitive they must have been. You want to say something. You want to tell them that those beads tell stories, that the patterns are as deliberate as any cathedral ceiling. You want to say that the pipe is not an artifact, it's a prayer, frozen mid-breath, but they wouldn't understand. And the security guard is already watching you closely. Museums are filled with the things your people weren't allowed to keep. Pipes confiscated during raids, robes taken from the dead, medicine bundles acquired by missionaries who smiled as they stole. Every item has a tag. Every tag has a number. Every number is part of a catalogue. There's a whole industry built around organising what was taken from you. It's called anthropology now, and apparently it's a science. The anthropologists are friendly enough. They speak softly and wear vests with too many pockets. They take notes in tidy notebooks and refer to your ways as cultural expressions. They tell you that your objects are being preserved for education, that they're safer here, away from the elements, as if your culture is a rotting fruit that needs refrigeration, as if the wind on your homeland was ever more dangerous than the locked drawers in the basement of a university archive. They publish papers, they give lectures, they take your language, your stories, your history, and translate it into academic prose with footnotes and jargon. They call it preservation, but they never ask how it feels to be dissected while still breathing. They never mention that the items on display were often taken by force, or that some of the bones in their collections still belong to people whose descendants are very much alive. You are not extinct, but you're being curated like you are. Schools teach your history in the past tense. Children read about the Indians as if they were a civilization that vanished sometime after the dinosaurs, but before the light bulb. Textbooks describe you in sweeping generalizations: noble, savage, spiritual, doomed. You're a character in someone else's story, a symbol, a cautionary tale. You're almost never quoted. Your version of events rarely makes the cut. You meet people who are surprised you still exist, who say things like, "I thought all the real ones were gone." They mean it as a compliment somehow. Like you're a ghost that's learned to use a cell phone. They ask if you live in a teepee. They ask if you get free college. They ask what percentage you are. You try to answer without showing your teeth. You've learned to be polite. It's safer that way. You find one of your tribe's ceremonial masks in a glass case in a museum 3 states away. The curator explains that it was donated by a private collector. No one explains how the collector got it. No one asks if the mask wants to come home. You submit a request for repatriation. It takes years. Committees must be formed. Reports must be written. Elders must prove what everyone already knows: that the mask belongs with its people, not between a mummy and a mammoth tusk. Even when items are returned, they're often damaged. The sacred becomes contaminated by the indignity of display. Some things were meant to be handled only during certain seasons, under certain skies, by certain hands. Now they've sat for decades under fluorescent lights, tagged and catalogued like property. You bring them home anyway. You clean them. You sing to them. You try to make them remember. You hope they forgive the silence. The museums aren't just places of memory. They're places of erasure. They frame your culture as something complete, as though it had a final chapter. They display the tools, the ornaments, the art, but not the pain, not the policies that try to grind it all into dust, not the families torn apart, not the children whose hair was cut and names erased. They want the regalia, but not the reasons you wore it, the pipe, but not the prayer. Your stories live on, but they grow quieter. Fewer people speak the language. Fewer still remember the songs. The museums hold more of your past than some of your own schools. You visit sometimes, just to see what was taken, just to remind yourself what survival looks like when it's been mislabeled as history. You stand in front of the glass and see yourself reflected next to the word prehistoric. You try not to laugh, but you also try not to cry, because even now, after everything, they still don't get it. Your culture isn't a thing to be stored or explained. It isn't dead. It isn't an exhibit. It's alive in every word you whisper to your children. It's there when you cook your food with your grandmother's hands. It's there when the drum beat starts and your feet remember. It's there in the way your cousin smirks when someone mispronounces your name for the 5th time. It's there in spite of everything. They can display your belongings in cabinets, under glass, behind velvet ropes and clever lighting. They can mispronounce your names and misunderstand your prayers. They can write your history in the past tense. But you're still here, breathing, teaching, remembering. And every time someone calls you a relic, they just remind you of how much they still don't know. You are not part of the past. You are its continuation. You were never supposed to make it this far. That much is clear when you look back at the policies, the raids, the boarding schools, The broken treaties, the rations, the fenced-in land. Every step in the so-called civilizing process came with an unspoken clause. Your erasure was the goal. Survival wasn't in the design. Your continued existence is not a result of policy, it's in spite of it. You weren't meant to be here, and yet somehow you are. But survival comes at a cost. You speak your language in whispers, behind closed doors, when no one with a clipboard or a clerical collar is listening. It's not that you're afraid anymore, at least not in the same way. It's that fear has been baked into habit. Years of punishment for every syllable outside the Queen's English taught you to be cautious. So you speak your real words softly, like a secret being passed down from one heartbeat to another. Some days it feels like all you have left is memory, and even that is wearing thin. Your children have names the missionaries can't pronounce. That's not an accident. It's not defiance exactly. It's preservation. Their names carry pieces of a world that wasn't supposed to survive the railroad or the reservation or the boarding school curriculum. You say those names proudly, even when school teachers butcher them and government clerks shorten them to something easier, because the easy version isn't the true one. And truth is something you've had to fight to hold on to. The census counts you, neatly, efficiently. You're a number now, filed alongside agricultural statistics and tax records. The government knows how many of you there are, where you live, what language you most commonly speak at home. But they don't see you. Not really. They see a checkbox. They see data. They don't see your grandfather's stories. They don't see the way your aunt still weaves baskets with a pattern that maps a river she hasn't seen in 20 years. They don't see how your community gathers at the start of each season, just like it always did, only now with permits. Sometimes you're invited to perform. Not leave, but culturally. At schools, at festivals, at museums that finally realised living native people might draw a crowd. You're asked to dress up, to dance, to sing, to smile, but only in the right ways, only in ways that make people feel comfortable. You're expected to be authentic but not angry, grateful but not political. You're expected to carry the weight of representation without ever complaining about how heavy it is. They call you a relic sometimes. Not out loud maybe, but it's in the way they frame you, as something surviving from a past era, as someone stuck in amber, as if your presence today is a kind of fluke, a holdover from a world long gone. But relics don't bleed, they don't ache, they don't worry about whether their children will forget their songs. You do, every day. You try to teach what you can. You gather the youth and show them how to carve, how to cook, how to find the medicine plants that grow stubbornly at the edge of the highway. You teach them the words the government tried to scrub away. You remind them where they come from, even if the land looks different now, scarred and paved over. You tell them the stories, even if some of the meanings have started to fray around the edges. It's not perfect, but it's a thread, and you hold on. The outside world still doesn't get it. You are asked how you can be native if you wear sneakers, if you use the internet, if you vote, if you work a 9 to 5. They expect feathers, not spreadsheets. They want buckskins, not business cards. They don't understand that you're not frozen in time. You are evolving, as you always have. Your ancestors survived plagues, droughts, forced relocations and war. You are part of that legacy. Adaptation is not assimilation, it's endurance. You still go to the ceremonies, not as many as before, not as openly, but they happen. They've changed, of course, what hasn't? But the spirit is there. The drumbeat still vibrates through your chest. The smoke still rises. You look around at the faces, young and old, and feel something almost like defiance, the kind that doesn't shout, but simply breathes, steadily, stubbornly. You weren't erased, not entirely, not yet, but the pressure to disappear hasn't gone away. It's just gotten quieter, more subtle. It comes in the form of budget cuts, poisoned water, forgotten promises. It comes in the form of red tape that makes it nearly impossible to protect sacred sites or reclaim ancestral land. It comes in court rulings that decide your sovereignty isn't quite sovereign enough. It comes in the form of silence, the kind where your concerns are politely acknowledged and immediately ignored. Still, you're here. You work jobs, you pay taxes, you raise kids, you mourn your elders, you laugh with your cousins, you live. And every breath you take is a contradiction to someone's assumption. Every time you sign your real name on a form, speak your language over the phone, sing your song at a gathering, you're proving that history didn't end with Wounded Knee, or with the Doors Act, or with any of the lines they drew to define when your story should have stopped. You're still poor in most cases, still overlooked, still struggling with systems designed by people who didn't think you'd be around long enough to complain. You don't have the land you should. You don't have the wealth you deserve, but you have roots, deep ones, and sometimes that's enough. Not for justice, maybe, but for survival. You are not a ghost. You are not a mascot. You are not a chapter heading. You are what remains after the fire. You are what refuses to burn. And though the world keeps trying to file you under past tense, you keep showing up in the present, fully alive and unwilling to fade quietly into any cabinet, case or textbook. You're still here. And that's the most inconvenient truth of all. You were supposed to vanish. That was the unspoken goal behind every treaty, every raid, every school that punished you for speaking your language. Not necessarily through violence, though there was plenty of that, but through disappearance, quiet, bureaucratic erasure. You were meant to become a memory, a page in a textbook, a name on a map that no one could pronounce. You were supposed to fade until there was nothing left but a tourist attraction and a handful of museum displays. But you didn't. What they didn't count on was the stories, not just the ones passed down in songs and chants, but the ones carried in blood and silence, stories told without words, in the way your grandmother braided your hair, in the way your father stood still during certain winds, in the way your people gathered, even when gathering had to be a secret. The stories lived. They bent, they fractured, they survived fires and lies, but they didn't go out. They lived in your bones, in the soil beneath your feet, in the names you gave your children when no one was listening. You are the child of survivors, not just biologically, but spiritually. You carry the weight of every ancestor who refused to forget who they were, even as the world tried to strip them of their shape. Their grief lives in you, but so does their laughter. Their hunger lives in you, but so does their ceremony. Their resistance lives in you, steady as breath. You were born from people who were hunted, converted, relocated, catalogued, but never erased. That kind of lineage doesn't disappear. It mutates. It endures. There is rage in your story, but it is not your only inheritance. There is also beauty, the kind that can't be killed, only hidden. It pulses in the way your people still dance, in the way they carve, paint, weave, and speak with eyes that remember a world before asphalt and time cards. You hold that beauty carefully, like an ember passed from hand to hand. It's not enough to keep the world warm, but it's enough to keep you from going cold. When you close your eyes at night, you don't dream of revenge. You don't even dream of justice, not exactly. You dream of continuity, of singing your songs without fear, of planting food in the soil your ancestors once walked, of children who know who they are without first having to learn what was taken from them. You dream of not surviving, but living, fully, freely, without apology. They try to burn your stories, but stories, like people, can be stubborn. Some flicker, some vanish, but others hide in the ashes, waiting for breath. You are that breath, and you are still here.